Hello, Jai Hind, and welcome. I have a very special guest this evening, and who needs no introduction at all. He comes from a hardcore defense background, from a Fauji background. His father was in the army. His father and my father have been friends, and he is a journalist who I truly admire greatly. Sandeep Uninathan. He is the editor of the News 9 Plus, India's first OTT video magazine. He's a graduate in ancient Indian history from St. Xavier's College, Mumbai. His first book, Black Tornado, The Three Sieges of Mumbai 2611, describes the military aspects of the 2611 attacks. It was released as a web series, State of Siege, on Z5 in 2020, the same year when this film I acted in called Tigmanshu Dulya's Yara released on Z5 in 2020. His second book, Operation X, co-authored with Captain Eminar Samant, was released in July 2019 and is the only authentic account of a coveted naval warfare unit run by the Naval Intelligence during the 1971 Indo-Pak War. Well, he is popularly known as a very popular defense journalist because he takes keen interest in defense matters especially. And let's go ahead further and let's speak to Sandeep Punithan regarding his journey into journalism. Sandeep, Jai Hind, and thank you very much for spending time, Sandeep.
Jai Hind, Major Shah, it's an honor to be on your show and to meet you again.
It's an honor to be in conversation with you, and thank you so much for consenting. Sandeep, let's talk about your journey growing up as a Fauji brat. What did you aspire to be at that time, and did it ever come into your mind that मेरे को भी फौज में जाना है because of the background and surroundings and the environment that you lived in, grew up in?
Major Shah, like you said, my father was in the forces. He was in the Navy first, and then he went on to the Merchant Navy. And in fact, our fathers were at Staff College together about...
Staff College in Wellington.
Right,
in Wellington. That time.
Yes, absolutely. The Gurkha Hill Club. And I still remember the day he came home and he says, "Do you know Captain Shah's brother is a movie actor?" So I remember that conversation as a little boy. But he went on to, he rose to being a commander, and then he left and he joined the Merchant Navy. And this was around the time that I had entered journalism. So it's been 30 years now. I joined the Indian Express as a trainee reporter. Of course, I hadn't planned on becoming a journalist. So I had done a course I graduated in ancient Indian culture, and I was going to become an archaeologist. I'd actually fixed that on mind, that I would be digging up old things. But as it so happened that fate had other things lined up for me, and I assisted a foreign journalist about 3 decades ago in India when he was here. And that's when I discovered my love for journalism, and I've not turned back ever since. It's been 3 decades. So I got into the short answer to is I never planned on being a journalist. I wanted to be something else. And yes, as a Fauji kid, there's tremendous pressure on you to follow your father's footsteps, because in Navy Nagar, where we were all in college and growing up, there was it's literally 30-40 of my friends, they were all into the Fauj at that time. Because, Major Shah, this was the early 90s. And the Indian economy hadn't opened up then. So it was, the government job was the ultimate thing that, young people growing up then could aspire for. And of course, if you were in the services, you had that advantage of, joining your father's line of work, or one of the 3 services. That was the choice. And of course, there were many others who've done extremely well, exceedingly well, even in corporate life. So, I mean, that's the short answer to what you asked me.
Right. Did you go ahead and study journalism somewhere? Did you take formal training in that?
I didn't actually. I learned on the job. So 30 years ago, a journalist named Chidanand Rajghatta, who was the resident editor of Indian Express, decided to bring in some fresh blood into the Indian Express, and he advertised for trainees. And so there were like 15 of us in that batch. That's the largest ever batch of trainees that the Indian Express had inducted at any one time. That's what we were told then. So, about those batch of 15, not many are in journalism, but there were quite a few of them. So I kind of learned on the job. So I was a trainee for about 6 to 8 months, and there's nothing better than hitting the ground running. 6 months in an actual newspaper would teach you more than what an academy would teach you in a year. So we were ready to go from month one on, I think.
Right. So tell me, how did the interest in covering defense come about? Can you hear me, Sudeep?
Yes, I can, loud and clear. So the interest in defense was, I guess, it had something to do with my father. He never told me to join the forces, or he said, look, you just do anything you like, whatever you're good at. I'm not, forcing you either Navy or Army or something. You do whatever you're good at, right? I'm not forcing any career choices upon you. But, just make sure that it's something that we can be really proud of, and, that those kind of things. So he was very open-minded about the kind of career choices that I took. And when I told him that I was going to be a journalist, he was was pleasantly surprised. And he called his parents up, and they said, well, there's never been a journalist in the family. So I come from a family of essentially teachers. So my father was the first person in the forces. So they were teachers. My grandfather was the principal of a school back in Kerala. So they were all pleasantly surprised when I took up this profession. But like I said, there was no pressure on me. But the defense thing, I would think began with my father, because he would leave a lot of books around the house. I mean, he was a voracious reader. So he would bring a lot of books from the reference library, the command reference library, and usually coffee table books and all that. And they were, about the World War and naval technology and Air Force stuff and Jane's Defense Weekly and all of that. So that's actually primarily how I developed an interest in defense matters. It's just by reading a lot, because I'm talking of the 80s, when you didn't have a lot of mass media. There was television barely covered anything. It was just that single channel, and you had magazines and books were the only way to, kindle your interest in any subject. So I think that kind of built up my early interest and curiosity in defense, because like I told you, I wasn't really going into the armed forces, but I had a fair defense understanding of defense matters, primarily because of the books. And of course, he had a very interesting friends circle. So, wherever they would come home, they would be all manner of people, and they would be guys who were engineers, and they were guys who were armaments guys. And so they would, invariably I would pick up on the conversations. So it was fascinating. I remember still there was someone who was a crew member on the INS Chakra, our first nuclear submarine, and he was telling me about it. And it was as for a boy who's 14 or 15 years old, to listen to a story of a nuclear submarine and how it functions under the water. Literally, it can spend. It does not have to surface. It's a true submarine in that sense. So I think that kind of kindled my interest in a lot of defense matters and all of that. So also when you're growing up in a certain environment, you do get a bit of an advantage in the defense field, because your early induction, your early education into defense is already taken care of. That's what I could say, because just if I may, just a minute more, just to describe the defense beat. It's a little complicated, the defense beat, because you have to have a knowledge of history and geography and technology and current affairs and politics and foreign affairs. There are very few people who can master this entire repertoire of knowledge that you need for this. Some manage with 2 or 3 or 4. So I think I got a bit of this grounding with all the reading that I did. So that stood me in good stead later on in life. So I think it's all about that. You just have to read a lot, and you have to know a lot. And of course, then when you become a journalist, you pick up all the basic principles of journalism, and you marry that with your knowledge. And that's how you, I guess, become a good journalist.
Right. You did your ancient Indian history from St. Xavier's College and St. Xavier's, Mumbai. They also have a very good mass communication department where they were doing a 10-month journalism program. My cousin went there, in fact. So did you have any association with the St. Xavier's Masscom guys?
I didn't actually. I was so focused in XIC, and I said, look, I'm going to finish my course and I'm going to jump straight into Deccan College. That was my next thing. because like I told you, I was so focused on archaeology, and it's very interesting that my the professor who I was in KC College before that, so I came into Xavier's to finish. I needed all 8 papers of XIC to go to Deccan College. So my professor in KC College, she was a former journalist herself. She'd been at the Illustrated Weekly, Dr. Savia Vegas. So she kind of, she's the one who actually got me into journalism as well. One of her friends had come from overseas, a journalist, and he was looking for a young trainee to kind of assist him because he didn't know India very well. So I kind of tagged along with him for a couple of months, and that's how I picked up my learned the ropes of journalism early on. So actually, my professor was a guiding light in that sense, and she was my ancient Indian culture professor as well. So that's how it was a combination that kind of I chose that one path that was in front of me, not archaeology or ancient history, but journalism.
Right. So your first book, Black Tornado, in fact, which became a rage as a web series as well. The book was very successful, of course, and
Yes.
it was so successful that people were inspired to make a web series out of it, State of Siege, which released on Z5 in 2020, in fact. So could you tell us a bit about this book when you started writing it, and the kind of research that you put in, the kind of people you would have met for writing this book?
So Major Shah, what happened was that in about 2008, everyone was covering 2611. And, stories were written about it and all that. But then when I started doing my research, I was with India Today magazine at that point. And there are magazine articles that you do, and magazines give you the luxury of depth and perspective and time and all that. So when I was researching this series of articles on 2611, that's when I realized that, look, there's never been a terror attack of this magnitude anywhere in India in terms of the military precision with which it had been planned and executed. And I felt that this was much more than just a magazine article. And that's when I started working on it. I said, look, I'll do my magazine article. I wrote it, I kept it aside. And then I started reaching out to all the people who had been involved in the operation. And what struck me about it was, of course, the fact that this was one counter-terrorist operation in which all arms of the services were involved. So, as you know, the first respondents to the attack were the Marine commandos of the Navy who arrived on the night. And in fact, they saved the maximum number of guests from certain slaughter there when they intervened in the night of 26th, early morning 27th. The Air Force flew in the NSG from Delhi, Manesar. And finally, it was the NSG that kind of handled the operations at the 3 locations. And they're all, as you know, ex-army officers. So it was an interesting combination of Army, Navy, and Air Force coming together to fight a terror attack. It wasn't planned that way, but it just so happened that this it unfolded in this manner. And what struck me actually is also what I mentioned in the last paragraph of the book. And the book came out in 2014, December of 2014. And my last paragraph, I said, look, the way with which this operation was, planned and executed, it's such a simple template for creating havoc across a city. You hold the city hostage for, a day, 2 days, 3 days. And this model is easily replicable anywhere across the world. And I specifically mentioned ISIS because at that time, as you know, in 2014, ISIS had become a force to reckon with in Syria and Iraq. They captured vast territories there, and there was possibility that they could stage terror attacks in major cities. And this is exactly what happened in 2016. So I took that call on writing this book from a perspective of informing security forces like, look, these are the kind of dangers that you need to be prepared for. You had 9/11 where hijackers took over aircraft and crashed them into buildings. But here you had a very unique thing of a commando-style operation, which is where you have terrorists who are training and executing a terror attack exactly the way naval special forces would. This was told to me by our Marine commandos. They said, look, what they did in 2611 is exactly what we trained for. I mean, of course, not against civilian targets, but to hit military targets. This is how we train. There is covert infiltration. We hit the beach. We split up into buddy pairs, and then different buddy pairs go and attack different targets. Like some would go after the aircraft, some would go after the troop barracks, some would go after oil tanks. All of that. This is exactly the model the LET guys used, a naval special forces raid, which they carried out in Mumbai. So this was what alarmed me when I was reading this whole planning. And I mean, there is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that this was actually planned by the Pakistan military. It was only executed by non-state actors, as they called, as they called. But the planning was a military mind, because when military minds work, how things unfold. This is not something that civilians can do very easily. So that was actually the reason I wrote the book. I said, look, there is someone who can look at and this is what terror groups do across the world. They look for blueprints that can be easily replicable. They can replicate in their own sphere. Like, hey, listen, let's look at this naval special forces raid that the LET did, or let's look at something else that Hezbollah did. So that's how that expertise is shared across the world. And I wanted to warn people of this kind of a thing. And sure enough, this is what happened in Paris in 2016. And shortly before that, I think at the Westgate Mall in Kenya as well, this prospect of commando-style gunmen running around and holding, various places hostage, holding and killing a lot of civilians just to hold a city, hostage. I mean, that was the motive of my writing that first book.
Right. I interviewed Major Sandeep Unikrishnan's Ashok Chakra's father a couple of years back on 26/11, and he told me when the news reached him, how it's definitely heartbreaking. And there was another, you mentioned about Marine Commandos, there was another gentleman called Praveen Toyatia, a Marine Commando, who got wounded in the operation. And so Praveen had a similar conversation with me. He told me the entire first-hand account as to, so what you were saying is so relatable. I can so relate to, in fact, Commando Surendra also was there. And Havildar Surendra, it's so relatable. I mean, hats off to the sacrifice of our bravehearts and people who took part in this operation. I really wish I had just come on release from service at that time, and just a few days later, and I got the news. I really was bloodthirsty and I was itching that, oh God, I wish I was there for this operation. In fact, so talking about this operation, and your second book, in fact, Operation X, which was co-authored by with you and Captain MNR Samant. So tell me a bit about your second book, in fact, Operation X.
Right. So Operation X, actually, it's strangely a story that I had been chasing for about 20 years. And the story begins in about 1996 when I was a reporter. There's in the Indian Express in Mumbai, there's Admiral M.K. Roy, who retired. He passed away a decade ago. An exceptional naval officer. He was the first Director General of our nuclear submarine project as well, exactly 40 years ago after he retired. Admiral Roy wrote a book called War in the Indian Ocean. And I got a first copy of that book. I went through the whole book, and there I discovered the very interesting chapter where he spoke about the Mukti Bahini naval commandos, where the Bangladeshi Mukti Bahini guerrilla force, as you know, they were carrying out exceptional attacks. They were running gunboats. They were attacking Pakistani merchant ships, warships. They had paralyzed the riverine waterways of East Pakistan in the 1971 war. And it so happened that my father was in naval intelligence during the war. So I called him up and I said, Dad, do you know anything about this operation? He said, yeah, I remember a whole lot of our my Bengali speaking friends had vanished during the war. Possibly they were behind this. I don't know. You just check it out. And I never got any answers. I kept knocking around. And then it so happened that one day about 8 or 9 years back, I met Captain Samant, and now exceptional individual, very quiet. He was a submariner. So as you know, submariners stay under the surface most of the time. And he said, listen, I've got this book I want to write. And, if we could team up. I looked at it and I instantly knew that he was one of the key people behind this operation. And then it was like, when he spoke, it was like a window into another world that is opening. And you bear in mind that the 1971 war, I still think that it's like a building which is still semi-lit. There are parts of this building that even now we don't know how many rooms are, which room is where, and which is lit, which is unlit. And he lit up one particular part of that building when he spoke. And this was an operation called Naval Commando Operations X. And naval intelligence, before the war, this is somewhere around April or May, set up a very secret, ultra secret unit comprising just about 20 people, officers and men, divers. So the Indian Navy did not have special forces. So they took people from the diving branch. They set up training camps in West Bengal. And you would not believe this, on the battlefield of Plassey, where Sirajudollah lost the Battle of Plassey almost 200 years back. They set up training camps and they recruited special Mukti Bahini young college students, very bright students who could swim. They taught them to become naval saboteurs. So what they had to essentially do is to carry one limpet mine on their chest, swim towards these merchant ships and plant the limpet mines onto the ships. So the aim was this naval intelligence plan was to destroy all the maritime shipping routes into East Pakistan. So, as you know, that India had blocked the overland access into East Pakistan. Overflights had been banned, of course. The only route that West Pakistan could supply East Pakistan was the naval route, the maritime route, through which ships would bring in arms, ammunition, soldiers. The ships were also used to transport tea and jute for foreign exchange that would give the Pak military its finances. So using these divers, they trained something like 400 of them. They were surface swimmers, essentially. They had no specialized breathing equipment. These surface swimmers, something like 400 or 500 of them, would swim and they would go and plant these limpet mines onto ships, destroy them, paralyze them. In a sense, what they did in 1971 is what the Houthis are doing today in the Red Sea. Of course, the Houthis have access to far greater technology in terms of anti-ship ballistic missiles and cruise missiles and drones and all that. But what these Mukti Bahini naval unit was doing was purely, it was surface swimmers carrying limpet mines. And then later on, in around August, this is again before the war, they converted gunboats, they had tugboats, Calcutta Port Trust boats into gunboats with mines. So this was this whole secret little unit that was operating, very, very skeletal unit of just about 20 officers and men. And they finally then, when the war broke out, they carried a riverine gunboat raid inside East Pakistan, all the way up to Khulna and Mongla and all those places. They gave a lot of intelligence and all that. This was led by Captain Samant. That gunboat raid was personally led by him. And of course, previous to that, they had carried out all these commando raids. And I think one attack, which is really noteworthy, I think it's the largest special forces attack ever carried out by any Indian service, which was Operation Jackpot on the night of August 15th, 1971, which is when something like 250 naval commandos simultaneously attacked 4 ports in East Pakistan. They sank or disabled something like 20-25 ships. So it was a remarkable operation, precisely coordinated. They struck simultaneously. And all this was done by a very small handful of naval officers and naval divers, naval sailors and all that. And some very remarkable stories there. And they, in fact, when the war ended, they had one of the highest number of gallantry awards to personnel. Now, every member of that unit was given a Nausena medal. This unit got something like 3 Mahavir Chakras, very unusual. Captain Samant got a Mahavir Chakra. Chiman Singh, Petty Officer Chiman Singh, who's the first Indian personnel to have operated behind enemy lines twice. He went in once before the war and once during this gunboat raid, where he was unfortunately captured and he was released after the war. But very incredible stories. And this came out when Captain Samant started speaking. And his boss in the naval intelligence at that time was Captain M.K. Roy, later Vice Admiral M.K. Roy, who had authored this book without once mentioning that he was the guy who was behind this whole thing. So he left a trail of breadcrumbs throughout his book.
You know the name of the 3 Mahavir Chakra awardees in this operation?
The three Mahavir Chakra awardees are Captain Samant, MNR Samant, Petty Officer Chiman Singh, and Lieutenant Commander Norona, who was the commanding
Okay, all
officer
right.
of the INS Panvel. The INS Panvel is a gunboat that led this Force Alpha. The raid was called Force Alpha, Mission Force Alpha. Alpha being for General Arora, who was the Eastern Army commander at that time. So it's an interesting unit because while they were actually all naval officers, they were operating under the Eastern Command in Kolkata, in Fort William. So Captain Samant was actually under Major General JFR Jacob, then Major General JFR Jacob. So he was his immediate boss in Kolkata. And in Delhi, of course, he was reporting to then Captain N.K. Roy and directly the Navy Chief Admiral Nanda. So like I mentioned, it's a very, very ultra secret unit that it's all on a need to know basis. So like I told you, I mean, even people in naval intelligence who were there didn't know about this operation. And it was so compartmentalized that you even had one person in Plassey, which was where the training camp was, and one person was training the naval commandos in Plassey, and his best buddy, who was a exceptional pilot called Lieutenant Commander Aku Roy, he was launching these commandos from Delta sector, which is in Agartala, Tripura, and his boss was then Brigadier Shabek Singh, and they didn't know that they were on opposite ends of the East Pakistan. One was in West Bengal, the other was in Tripura. That was how secret this operation was. All need to know basis, very, very minimal traffic. Radio traffic was almost non-existent, and they were actually operating with the army. They were all hosted by the army. The tentage, everything was done. So when people talk about joint services operations and theater commands and all, I say, hey, listen, you have a perfect example of the 1971 war, which is where all the three services worked in perfect harmony, without actually having created any formal structures like theater command. It's the 71 war is an example of the military carrying out a plan to perfection, executing its missions. I mean, of course, they had the benefit of hindsight. They had planning. They were given time to plan for that operation. As Field Marshal Manekshaw said that, look, I'm not ready for a war now. You have to give me some time to prepare for it. So this was a war that we kind of prepared and went into, and that tells you the kind of results that we achieved. So that's essentially what Operation X is all about. Operation X is a shortened title for what the operation was called by the Navy. It was Naval Commando NCOX. That's the full form of it, but Operation X for short. So I had
that is
lot
so
of
interesting. That's so interesting and intriguing. And
yes.
Where can we get hold of both these books? I mean, they are available online on Amazon.
Yeah, they're both available on
Amazon,
Flipkart. Yeah, they're both available on Amazon and Flipkart. Yeah, you can see them there, right there.
Perfect.
So,
would you be having it offhand, Abhi, right now, so we can have a look at the cover?
Oh yes, certainly. I can just pop out.
Yeah, sure. Superb. So Sandeep is just going to show the cover of this book, and intriguing. And trust me, if you meet this guy in real life, he'll blow your mind. He's so good. Black Tornado, superb.
And that's Operation X. Yeah.
That's Operation X. Great. So what are you waiting for, guys? Just go ahead right now. It's there online on Flipkart and Amazon. Read it, and trust me, you'll thank me after reading it. You'll thank Sandeep, of course, but you'll thank me for further recommending it to you. You're already doing well. I know a lot of senior people who have bought this book and who have read it, who swear by this book, in fact. So Sandeep, tell me, apart from writing and anchoring, and you're a very good speaker as well. So from writing into journalism, did you feel at that time, because I recently saw some of your interviews, my goodness, you have the quality to grip the audience with your questions. You have the craft on your fingertips. So when you decide to be a journalist from Indian Express in your journey now, and now you speak often voraciously on television. So did you know that as a journalist, it will also entail you to speak as well, the way you speak right now?
Well, I must tell you that this is nothing that I planned for. It was just, I must tell you that when I joined journalism about 3 years back, I know I sound like an old uncle now, but when I joined journalism, the last typewriters were still there in Indian Express. and the first computers were, of course, being used. So I actually see the kind of technology, and television was something that was, it was 1993, 94. It was basically in its infancy. So we've kind of seen television grow through. I've seen it grow through my career. In fact, when I joined India Today almost 20 years back, we saw brands like Aaj Tak and, of course, India Today Television, as it was called then, Headlines Today, literally grow in front of our eyes. I've had an opportunity to report for Headlines Today and later India Today Television. I have very dear friends who still work there. Some of them doing an excellent, exceptional job. There's Shiv Arur, of course, you would know, Gaurav Sawant, Rahul Kamal. These are all very exceptional television journalists. So, I mean, while I wasn't into TV journalism, I would actually appear on some of the shows there, and I did some reporting assignments that were covered by India Today. I reported for India Today, of course, and we had a program there in India Today called Battle Cry that was hosted by Shiv, Gaurav, and me. And this was a weekly program where we would actually talk about defense developments and all that. So I guess that's where I learned a lot of the, I learned the ropes of television journalism, the digital journalism as well, multimedia journalism. So it was like India Today, I think for me was it was like going to university. Indian Express was school, journalism school for me. I was there for 6 years. And India Today was about 20 years. I was there for a very extended period of time, 20 years. So that was, for me, it was like college and post-graduation. So that's where I learned a lot of things. And of course, I'm very grateful for the editors at India Today. When I was there, they gave me the time and the space to write the books, because book writing, as you know, it's a very time-consuming, laborious process. You need time, you need leave of absence and all that. So it's really important that you have colleagues, you have editors who understand. And fortunately, that was something, because we've had editors there who've written a lot of books. So they've kind of very encouraging and supportive of book writing. So that's how it was. This thing of learning the ropes was all there in India Today. And I think a lot of what I did and what I'm doing now, including speaking and appearing on television and digital platforms, is thanks to the exposure I got at India Today.
Wow, very well put across by you. And before I let you go, any last message you'd like to throw out in the universe, anything from your side to anyone, to aspiring journalists, to people who are taking interest in defense matters, or anything from your side, Sandeep?
Yeah, well, I think, Major Shah, I think the Indian Armed Forces are a remarkable institution. You've been part of it. You've been extraordinarily privileged to be not only an army officer, but you're now a media celebrity. You're a media personality. You've acted in films as well. I've seen some of those. But you have a better appreciation of what life is like in uniform, out of it. The Indian Armed Forces are a very extraordinary institution, because when you talk about honor, integrity, values, all of that, this is all there in the Armed Forces. It's an extraordinary institution. It's one of the finest institutions in the country. And what I think is that now it's undergoing a very, very deep transformation. And the period that we're looking at in the last couple of years, is that you're looking at various changes that are taking place in a sense that you're looking at an armed force that will be the armed forces of a country that is going to be one of 3 most important powers in the world in a decade from now. So you're looking at the kind of deep military transformation that has begun in terms of new structures that are being set up. You have the office of the Chief of Defense Staff that's been established. You have, for the first time, a very concerted move towards defense indigenization. This is something that we've been hearing a lot about. There's been lip service that has been paid to it in the last couple of years, but now it's moving forward with a kind of momentum that we've not seen earlier. The government is opening up the defense industry to the private sector. There's lots of changes happening. So these are very exciting times ahead, I feel, for the armed forces. And of course, let's not forget that we are in a very peculiar situation where two nuclear armed neighbors who are in a collusive relationship. So that, in that sense, the military's primacy will always be there. As long as you have these unsettled boundaries with two nuclear armed rivals who are both, in this collusive relationship, I think the primacy of the military will always be there. They'll be looked at with greater attention. They'll be looked at with a lot of empathy, primarily because a lot of us forget that all of this economic growth and progress and prosperity, it cannot happen in a vacuum. You need stability, you need security, you need a strong military, and that's what essentially the Indian military brings to the table. So if you're talking of India being the world's third largest economy by the end of this decade, it's not something that just happened because the Indian economy is, performing spectacularly as it is, but it's also because of the fact that you have very fine institutions like the Indian Armed Forces that are ensuring peace, stability, and security, so that you can have economic growth and prosperity. So I think the military is a very important aspect of India's development in the next 1 or 2 decades, when the economy is expected to grow really quickly, and there's the targets of becoming a developed nation by 2047. The military is going to be very key to that development, that growth, and that those milestones that we have to achieve in the decades ahead. So exciting times ahead for the military. So if my message to anyone who wants to join this sector, it's please come, become journalists, be war correspondents, be defense correspondents. There's lots of stories that are out there waiting to be told, waiting to be written, because this is a country that's only now becoming aware of its military in terms of the literature that is now coming out. So earlier, a few decades back, the kind of military literature that was out there was very limited, in the sense that you had a few books, you had biographies, hagiographies even, but the kind of deep writing on Indian matter, military, our histories, our conflicts, the kind of battles that we fought, the insurgencies that we have, been deployed in, how we've tackled those insurgencies, and how they've been very different from the way other countries handle their insurgencies. You're very well aware of that. You've been part of these operations yourself. How the Indian Army is really different. These are the kind of stories that need to be told, especially because there's this huge audience out there that's literally hungry for these stories about our braves, the achievements, their role in not only Indian operations but peacekeeping operations across the world. Why the Indian military is a force for stability, of why it's a force for good. So that's my long answer to your short question.
It was wonderful, absolutely wonderful being in conversation with you, Sandeep. And thank you very much for taking your time. And thanks a lot. Thanks a real lot for this.
Thank you, Milish.
And last question for you: how does it feel now to be on the other side? Like, you've been on the other side each time. This time I've got you. I've managed to convince you to be on the other side. Like, you have taken an interview.
Yeah, well,
you're giving an interview.
Well, no, it's nothing. It's an honor to be on your show. I've watched your shows with a lot of interest, and you interviewed some very distinguished personalities. So I was a little saying, why do you want to speak to me? Like,
Come on. You're being really modest now. You're being very modest.
No. Yes. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Take care. Jai Hind, Sandeep.
Take care.
Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.